is her incredible podcast. So go and check it out. The Holistic Pharmacy Podcast. Correct, Marina?
Yes. And season 5 has launched last week. We have an amazing first guest. So go and check that out.
I've listened to several episodes, super detailed, funny. You get a lot of Marina's wit and humor, so worth it just for that. But if you love the world of holistic medicine, which I hope many of you do, because that's why you're here, you get a ton more information. So please tune in. Today, why you should be here, plant-based versus vegan. The thing that I'm thinking is, Kevin not being as well-versed is, what foods do I eat and don't I eat? And Marina's going to go much deeper. She's going to talk about the philosophical kind of meanings behind it, everything related to the nutritional values, that are based in those two spaces. And we'll have a lot of fun. We'll play our reel and we'll jump in. All right, Marina. So we're rocking and rolling here with plant-based versus vegan. And I know that you are a plant-based believer and advocator, but tell us more, like what is the difference and what should we think about when we hear those two terms?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a lot of people do use them interchangeably, and most people, when they hear it, and I'm sure you do as well, Kevin, you automatically think about nutrition, right, as a dietary preference or theory. But actually, the term vegan is all encompassing as a sort of identity and a lifestyle that somebody chooses to lead more from a philosophical and ethical lens versus like a health oriented lens. So I think of plant-based as like people eating mostly plants because they feel like this is supportive to their health, whereas vegans don't use any animal-based product at all, whether it's eating or wearing it or shopping at all for anything that has animal sourcing or animal cruelty of any part. So they just choose to not participate in those industries that have any role in, animal use, abuse, cruelty, etc. And so it's more so like an ethical choice that they stand by versus them wanting something for themselves selfishly.
Okay, that makes so much sense. So really, one, as you're mentioning, is really philosophical choice to be able to not partake in animal products. The other one is really saying, I'm looking for the most nutritional value, and this is my kind of nutritional choice to consume these types of foods or food sources. Okay, that's super helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, and I do think there's, of course, overlap, and we can consider multiple angles in both ways, but that's kind of the distinction for me. And also, vegan is very much like 100% no animals whatsoever. I have met vegans that give themselves a little bit of like a leeway, like 80-20 rule, 90-10 rule, but most of the time it's very much 100% choice to just not be involved in any part of their life with animal, again, products or cruelty. And they're just very careful, in any aspect, right? And it is a very intentional way of being, and it is, very much a commitment, right? An ethical commitment. And plant-based is a little bit more flexible, in my opinion, where there is an inherent suggestion that you're not only eating plants, but you're mostly eating plants. So there's already kind of this built in, okay, there's probably some leeway, but we are basing our diet in mostly plants. And then we are supplementing with some of the other food groups if we choose to.
Makes a ton of sense. So tell me this, Marina, like you've got my brain always spinning, but with this one, I'm really thinking from the patient perspective and from the provider perspective. You don't often hear someone say, hey, I'm here to pick up my medications, or I'm here to see the doctor about this condition. And the questions that come out of the mouth of the individuals that are helping them, the healthcare practitioners, saying, what are your dietary preferences? Usually it's what are your allergies? What other medications are you taking? What is your medical history? We don't hear about that, but it plays such an impactful role in treatment. What are some things that we should think about, Marina, on one, why we should ask that question, on dietary preference, and how it may, just with one or two examples, how it may impact treatment decisions or care decisions?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this goes back to what we're always talking about, you and I, Kevin, about people's cultural beliefs and personal beliefs playing a role in their therapy, and them also needing to have autonomy and sovereignty and agency over their care. And that's what I'm a big proponent of and advocate for all the time. As well as us healthcare professionals also needing to have some autonomy in our roles as healthcare provider. And a lot of times it does feel a bit restrictive by the guidelines of, what we're supposed to be doing versus what we feel ethically we should be doing. So there are these things to navigate. And I think it does become a part of us advocating for our professions and advocating on behalf of our patients as to what should we change, the standard of practice too. And sometimes that, there are some missing key pieces. So I think one of them is, yes, the patient's or the client's preference. And that goes beyond just dietary, right? It goes into like, what is their philosophy and ethics and religion and tradition and background. Yep. So that we can understand, is there a level of education that needs to happen? Is there a level to which we can accommodate some of their preferences? So I think there definitely just needs to be room for that conversation to get started with. And I think sometimes, they bring it up, like if they're religious and they need to have, let's say, kosher or some, lack of gelatin or animal products in that case, or follow another type of, guideline. And then sometimes their religion does also allow for, okay, if it's medication, then we can kind of be more lenient, less strict with those kind of restrictions or preferences. But overall, yeah, I think we should just be asking about any hesitations, right? So, because we're always talking about compliance. So besides what we've asked, right, besides what is on the standard papers like allergies and history, we can also kind of leave a room for interpretation. Like, okay, is there anything else that would concern you if we were to put it together a treatment plan for you? And if it would involve medications, what would be kind of stopping you? And it could be cost. It could be like they want more education or information. It could be they want some information about the ingredients. And I've definitely had instances in the pharmacy where I had to look things up and make sure to substitute like gel caps for tablets for those kind of requests. And then there's definitely often a lack of communication of those preferences between the doctor and the pharmacy. So then the pharmacy fills for the wrong thing. And then the patient has to, kind of not be so happy, right? Because there was this lack of communication. Right. And there needs to be more of a emphasis, because the doctor keeps prescribing capsules and the pharmacy keeps filling capsules, even though there's notes everywhere. And so we need to be better about that.
You made me think we should coin a phrase. We've got drug-drug interactions, drug-gene interactions. We've got drug allergy, drug food. What about drug culture, right? I mean, maybe there's a drug cultural interaction that we need to start documenting and making sure that we know across multiple systems so that people don't feel like someone doesn't care about them. And that's the other thing is, I know we're talking from the healthcare provider's perspective here on what to look at, but also you and I are always love advocating for patients and empowering them that they should be asking for these things, and let your healthcare providers know, like, this is your health and these are your choices. So being able to be there and be present and find that level of trust with the healthcare provider to let them know that this is my dietary choices, these are my medication choices, are an important thing to be able to formulate prior to a visit or a stop at the pharmacy or wherever you may be. So with that being said, Marina, what are some other things you wanted to teach us about when it comes to vegan versus plant-based, so that we can be better educated on how to deploy those words and to utilize them as patients and practitioners?
Yeah, I think my main point of distinction was like this 100% like principle action of not having anything to do with animals in any area of their life, right, of someone's life. And that being just like the ethical, philosophical principle that somebody upholds versus a dietary choice that somebody is making for themselves in order to support their health. And with all the information out there, I'm always quoting Michael Pollan: eat real food, not too much, mostly plants. You really can't go wrong with those principles. And they're just so wise. And it is just keep on, regurgitating over and over again how wise that is as a philosophy. And so people who lead a plant-based diet They may have some animal products to supplement their needs, like especially, animal products in terms of like fat-based vitamins, right? Oil
Yep.
soluble vitamins, A, D, E, K. It's much harder to get that from plants than
Right.
from animals. And then we also have, protein needs, and that is, we have a complete protein, and it's usually easier to digest for certain people in the form of an animal broth or an animal versus again having to try to get the complete protein from plants. And
Yeah.
some plants have anti-nutrients. Those plants that contain proteins, sometimes we have trouble digesting and absorbing those proteins. So I do think there is a role for animal products for health, right? For health reasons. And then there's also a different category we could throw in. And if you want to pull up one of those charts, there's also whole plant
Yes.
based, right? Category where people aren't using certain oils, right? And they're wanting to, let's say, instead of use an avocado oil, they're going to go for just avocado because it's a whole food versus just like a squeezed oil. So there's those people that are also following whole food plant-based diets, and the distinction there is they're not going to take isolated parts, even if it's just an oil from a plant. They're actually going to be looking to get that whole plant. So say say they would want the actual avocado, or they would want like to consume the entire flax seed or the chia seed, and not just like an extract of it, or like yes, the active ingredient of that. So overall, I would say herbalism is a whole plant-based approach, but there's not anything that's like 100% dogmatic. So I would say like a vegan or a whole food plant-based person is a little bit more dogmatic, right? Than just saying herbal approach or plant-based approach. That kind
Wow.
of has more leeway and room for interpretation.
That is a great distinction. The last question I have for you, Marina, is, and if you don't know it, then no worries. I'm always throwing you curveballs, but blue zones, Mediterranean diets, and like the diets that are used in countries where people are having longer lifespans, maybe higher quality of life scores. When it comes to plant-based diets and kind of fitting those into categorizations, are there any other diets that have been like highly publicized throughout healthcare? So I mean, Mediterranean diet, every study I have read, maybe not over the last 5 years, but previous 5 to 10 years, was always plugging Mediterranean diet, right? That was the buzzword. But I'd love to get your, couple thoughts on just where does plant-based and some of these popularized or blue zone-esque diets kind of fall in together?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Mediterranean diet is a great example because we do have the most studies and literature and evidence behind it. And we could kind of see features of it in other blue zone areas. And I think there is even a term, the blue zone diet. But, depending on where that zone is, whether it's Greece or Japan or other parts of the world, it's basically a form of like the indigenous dietary principles that have survived generations after generations and weren't as impacted by the industrialization and the agricultural practices and the processed food industries that the rest of the world was. So it's like mostly these isolated communities that have actually kept to their traditional diets, which is fascinating. And I also love the work of Weston A. Price, and I'm always talking about him. And he studied how the indigenous diets and the foods that were culturally eaten in certain parts of the world. And he definitely emphasizes good quality fats as a fertility food and animal products as something that does need to be included, but that doesn't mean that it can't still be plant-based, right? So Mediterranean, you'll see so many seeds, like beneficial seeds, some healthy grains and lots of veggies and healthy fats like olives, right? And then there's some fish and potentially some meat in there as well, and lots of olive oil. So, so it still could be plant-based with some animal products.
I love it. Always dropping nuggets of incredible information, Marina. Well, everybody, it has been a ton of fun. I hope you learned something today. We'll be back for another exciting episode next week, and we hope you guys have a wonderful rest of the day. Bye.
Bye-bye.